The entire time I knew him, he only ever had one call: to be the #1 business podcast in the universe. If he can get all favorite movies of everyone in the world, he can do it with the snap of his fingers. Just like that.
Tell me his name again.
Lou Diamond. We've made top 5 once, and we'll do it again, but better. He's got a plan, and the end is near. When he's done, Thrive Loud will be the #1 business podcast that ever existed, as it should be. I know they'll remember you.
My name is Lou Diamond. Thrive Loud. This Thrive Loud episode is brought to you by Hinge Consulting. Success on Amazon hinges on well-executed strategies. Contact Hinge Consulting to learn about total Amazon channel management and to see if your business has what it takes to grow over 300% over the next 12 months. That's Hinge Consulting at hingeconsulting.co.
Get ready to Thrive Loud with Lou Diamond.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Thrive Loud with Lou Diamond, connecting you to the most inspiring and amazing people that are thriving each and every day. Today on Thrive Loud, we have for you someone that is all about profitability, productivity, and accountability. A leadership expert who delivers high-energy keynotes, presentations that challenge his audience to leverage their focus and pay attention to what matters most at work and in life. She is the author of the new book, Attention Pays. She's from Australia, which she says means she's a bit mischievous, witty, and a bit cheeky. However, I'll argue she's bursting with brilliance, energy, and power. Thrive Loud listeners, I literally ran into her last week in a bookstore as she's promoting her book, not knowing she was there, took some pictures, posted all over social media because she's that cool and that open and that sweet. She's ready to rock and roll. Thrive Loud listeners, Neen James. Neen, how are you today?
G'day, gorgeous. What a treat to not only do the show with you, but to run into you on Fifth Avenue. That was like the coolest thing ever.
Yeah, so the Thrive Loud listeners need to know this, that we always love to cross promote and help people out in any way that we can. And I knew that Neen was coming on the program. I was 2 blocks away from where this book was being featured in the window. And I walked by the Barnes and Nobles and there's no books in the window. So I walk inside and say, I don't know if this is possible or not, but did they take Neen James's Attention Pays book out of the window? And they go, I don't know. Why didn't you ask her? And I turn around and there she is with the entire staff, which was totally crazy.
Well, they pulled them all out the window so I could autograph them all, which was very sweet of them. And they were very kind to make a big deal of the book. And I loved their support. But more importantly, I appreciated your support to go in and want to share that on social. So thank you.
Well, truly my pleasure. And I think in the spirit of sharing, our Thrive Loud fans would love to learn a little bit more about you for those that don't know you, because you've got a pretty famous gig going on, my good friend. Can you share with the listeners a little bit more about this recent direction about the attention paying, if you would, for profitability, productivity, and accountability? How you've been directing this particular message today, because I think that'll be really cool. So lead us up to how this came to be your focus of late.
Well, I think I'm probably just like your listeners. There's definitely no fame associated. However, I have been immersed in this whole idea of how do you get more done and how do you do the most important work. And so I grew up in corporate business in Australia. I worked in retail, banking, telecommunications, and the oil industry. And Lou, you got to imagine there's not a lot of chicks in oil in Australia, but I had the time of my life. I eventually set up my own company and I realized there was a real need for people to be able to get more done. And so many people listening to this will understand that now more than ever before, we're dealing in a time where people feel like they have what we've named the over trilogy, meaning they're overwhelmed, they're overstressed, and they're overtired. And regardless of whether you're a corporate person, an entrepreneur, whether you have desires for something different in your life and you're really looking to thrive, I realized that I loved corporate, but that if I was to go out on my own, I would have more flexibility. So I set up my own company. fast forward to us relocating to the US. So imagine I went from living in Sydney City to this tiny little place called Doylestown, Pennsylvania, which is, for our listeners, it's like halfway between Philly and New York. So definitely not the city, definitely no water, no harbor, no hustle and bustle, but I love it. And so I had to reestablish myself completely. And what people may or may not know is that the majority of my income is the profit center of keynote speaking. And that's what I love to do. I love being with audiences and sharing how they can really focus on what matters. For companies, how can they increase their market share? How can they attract and retain that top talent? How can they really get those projects and those sales completed in a way where everyone loves working with them? And so for me, my predominant profit center is keynote speaking. And so often I would be asked by my clients, hey, can you help us get more done? And so that was what I was really focused on, was productivity. But I realized, Lou, that you can't manage time, but you can manage your attention. And so my work in this whole idea of attention came because I realized attention is the evolution of productivity. We are all going to be gifted with 1,440 minutes in a day, and you and I get the exact same amount of time. No matter how rich we are, how poor we are, how accomplished we are, it doesn't matter where we are on our journeys, we all get that same gift of time. And so what I realized is, while we can't manage time, we can manage our attention, which is why my body of work shifted. And my research, I went very deep in this whole idea of how can companies make more money when they pay attention to their customers and to their team? How can individuals have deeper relationships when they pay attention to those that they care about? And how can we as global citizens have a bigger impact on the planet when we take responsibility for the resources that we have? And so I really believe, Lou, that we and your listeners, we pay attention in three ways: personally, professionally, and globally. And when I got that clarity, that's when everything came together.
I like it. And for the listeners who obviously know, I speak a lot about connecting. One of the key connecting core muscles we talk about is the power of empathy and the ability to listen. And really, in what is Neen is hitting on the head here is obviously paying attention and really understanding when you do that, how effective it is. I'm going to share with the listeners something really cool. I have had the opportunity to watch Neen facilitate a group of people. In fact, a group of people of very focused speakers, which makes it even more interesting, where she got us to understand the importance and the rules of being efficient within the window of time that we were working in. I wanted to ask this question because I thought that it was actually quite brilliant how you not only kept us on point, but you were very process focused in how the whole day was going to work. In speaking with lots of the different companies or organizations you speak to, help us understand some of the key messages and tools to help them. Do you help them change the way they think about the time that they have?
I think, too, if you take the situation where we had the opportunity to be in the same room with professionals who run their own business, they also, the majority of them are keynote or trainers, and so they're used to being the person who's speaking. So imagine trying to corral those people, right? But I
do it on my podcast show every single episode. It's really freaking impossible.
Not today. Today will be the exception.
Okay.
But it is always my belief that my agenda is to serve my client. And in this case, it was the president of the association. And so my role was to ensure that by the end of our time together, we achieved all of the objectives that she had outlined. She and I had spent significant time building the agenda, and we wanted to honor the people who had come prepared. And so we had worked. It wasn't just what was happening in the room, Lou. I think what you saw was the result of significant hours in investing in the agenda building and the rules that we had set up, the rules of engagement, even before people walked in the room. There are things that you can do if you want to facilitate, whether it's a conversation or a sales pitch or even a training program that you might be doing in your organization, is the things you do before actually have a massive impact on what happens during. And I believe in what we call BDA, which is before, during, and after. So some of the things that I did in advance was to reach out to the individuals through electronic communication, was to pre-publish some of the guidelines and objectives that we have. was to ensure people were prepared before they came into the room. And when we got to the room, I made sure I personally greeted everyone, that I started on time, that I reminded people of the agenda, that I didn't allow a lot of small talk or diversions or side conversations, that I was very, very clear that while I can be kind, I also had very specific objectives to achieve. I talk time a lot, and Lou, what that means is instead of saying, hey, we're going to take a break for 5 minutes, I'll say, it's 11:15. I'm going to start speaking again at 11:20. I would love you to be in the room when I do that. And so when we talk time instead of increments of time, it reminds people to look at their watch, and I started at 11:20. And so I think what you've got to do is, to your point about really connecting and really having these opportunities to connect with people, you want to make it safe for them. You want to make sure they understand what those guidelines are, but you also want to be accountable for what you declare. So if you say you're going to start at 11:20, then you better do it. So that's the accountability piece. And I also made sure too that we had built sections in the agenda if we had to go a little off track. Well, when would that happen? Also honoring our body's circadian rhythm. So for some people, they get a little bit more tired in the afternoon. So making sure that we could really make sure that we were leveraging that they had like food and resources. So there's all sorts of things that go into facilitating things like that. But I think what's very clear to people that were in that room is that there was no messing around. I was super clear about what we needed to achieve. And I think historically, knowing this particular organization, that conversations have been allowed to go off track. People have been allowed to go off the agenda. And I know the president wanted to set a tone for her presidential year. And so that meeting was also part of a bigger agenda that she's running very specific meetings, very focused meetings, very productive meetings. And I wanted to honor everything about that. But I also wanted to make sure that everyone felt heard. And there was one or two people who I could see were really struggling with my facilitation style. And so I made sure I connected with them in the break.
I apologize
and
for
so
that.
People may... You weren't on my list, honey. But I think what's interesting is, as a facilitator, for anyone listening to this, we facilitate conversations at home, at work, with our clients, with potential clients in business development, at networking events. And so we have to be very, very aware of not just what we're saying, but what our body language is doing, what tone of voice that we're using, what word choices we're making. And that was everything that you saw on show in that particular meeting.
So, Neen, I'm going to get into something that I'm very curious about now, because I'm going to go with an assumption here, but I want to ask the question. As it relates to your keynotes and when you speak, there must be a level of organization and like a clock ticking in your brain that knows how each section of your intended keynote goes. Is it that well planned within your delivery?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because to the person who's sitting in the audience, it looks very organic. It looks very spontaneous. But you can be sure I know exactly how long each story or setup takes. And there's even a particular section of my keynote where I pull people out of the audience and I put them in a hot seat and I grab a flip chart and I walk them through a process, and then I reveal to them how brilliant they are in front of the 1,000 people in the room. Looks very spontaneous, and the creation of it with that hot seat person is very much, but there's a structure to it. I know exactly how long it's going to take me. If they're really good and if they're really bad, it's all built in. I also have compartmentalized my keynote so that in the event that often happens with meeting planners is, let's say the CEO's State of the Nation might go longer. And so as the opening keynote speaker, I will need to reduce my keynote to ensure that my meeting planner is back on track. And so I always offer every meeting planner, hey, would you like me to get you back on track? Because I know what stories I can drop, what customization I can change. And I also have within my keynote, Lou, there's different versions of my keynote, but there's a particular section that is always customized for every audience. I know exactly how long that's going to take. And so I know that that's really important often to the CEO, the CFO, or maybe the CMO that I'm working with. And so I make sure that's one part that's not lost. So it looks very, very spontaneous. spontaneous, but you better believe it's very organized. I've had the privilege of working with Michael and Amy Port. They run a program called Heroic Public Speaking, and they are very adamant about the importance of rehearsal. But rehearsal so that it feels like it's in your body, not rehearsal so it feels like it's canned. Yep. Unfortunately, I can't do canned. I can't say the exact same thing every time. I have mad respect for people who can do that, but that's not my reality. So I've had to learn to place pieces in timing so that I know that I can achieve what the client needs, that the audience responds and is engaged, but I also need to be able to operate without PowerPoint, without technology, without a timer. Sometimes there's not a timer in front of you. You have to just look at your watch and know exactly where you're at. So they're all things that are happening while I'm on stage.
This is an interesting point. By the way, Michael and Amy are coming on Thrive Loud in a few months, so listeners will get a chance to
your listeners are in for such a treat.
They're truly two dynamic people, and we'll save that for their episode, so it'll be a good placeholder there. But thank you for the promo of them as well. Here's something that I have learned in time, and I learned this actually personally relating to the word time, that some people have a really good grasp of how long something takes. This is actually something mechanical within your brains or sensory, if you would. You've always heard these people that are either predominantly late or don't really know how long it takes them. I've been joking with my wife forever that her definition of 5 minutes to get ready needs to be revisited. I digress. But what I will tell you is that I've worked with people and leaders who have taken a lot of I'm very similar to you in the way that I prepare my keynote. It's almost like you could double click on keynotes to workshops to coaching sessions, however you want to break them out in the level of detail. And my sense of understanding topic, timing, and delivery are very well balanced because I do have a good understanding and appreciation of how long something takes. I've dealt with leaders who don't. In the sense that they need many tools in place to know how long something will take, or they're just not as familiar with what might be involved. My question to you is, because in understanding and paying attention to the importance of profitability, productivity, accountability, have you run across organizations and leaders who don't have that real grasp of time? Because it is so important in a lot of the work that you do.
Yeah, and I think for me, it often happens, some of my clients are more creative. So I work with people in the movie industry, in the advertising and creativity space, and their ability to rein in their ideation can be really challenging. And so what I've learned with them is part of my responsibility in working with them, whether it's one-on-one with the CEO or working with their team, is to help enforce the importance of time, but also it's more than just the time itself. It's about honoring other people. And so, for example, I had a client who was notoriously late for our meetings. And so I had said to him, as much as I love meeting with you, I'm not extending our meeting. You had, scheduled 40 minutes. You're now 10 minutes late. We have 30 minutes left together. I can't extend our time by 10 minutes. After the second time I told him about this, he said, well, I'm paying you. I said, you're paying me for my expertise, not my time.
Right.
And so I think what we have to do is help people understand that when you're late, you're being rude. And that's as simple as it gets. And so I know things happen, but I think, especially with some of the cultures that I work with and growing up in Australia and having such a wonderful Asian influence in Australia, that I have always valued people's time as the most important. I was told very young in my career, if you arrive on time, you're late. And so knowing that, I've always been the person who's early but treats time with high importance. It's funny what you share about your wife. One of the things that we have done in my own house and with other clients I've worked with is this whole idea of working backwards in time. So, for example, my conversation with my husband goes like this. What time do you want to leave the house? Because if I know what time we're going to leave the house, I will be ready by that time. And I think what we have to do with our team members, with our partners, with our children, is we can teach them time as long as we kind of work backwards. And so I know how long it takes me to get ready. I know how long it takes to put on the security system and all the things we need to do around the house. And I think we have to also be willing to teach others that and build in some time. I have a family member who thought it was totally okay to always be 60 to 90 minutes late for any dinner invitation. So we just started lying to them and just telling them it was actually earlier than we needed them there. And sometimes they were on time. Now, they got pretty wise to us after a while, so it didn't work for a long time. But I think we have to be very diligent about time, no matter what culture you're from, no matter whether you believe you're a person who's in time or out of time. Time is one of those indicators that has a massive impact on the way the world sees you. If you are someone who's constantly late, people talk about that, and that's not what you want associated with your brilliance. And so I would suggest that you don't let it be a distraction. Even if you have to trick yourself and set your watch early, or you have to build in travel time, or you have to build in breaks more regularly. What I've learned to do with some of my CEOs is help them work with their assistant to manage their calendar a little differently. I think what happens is we overestimate how much time and we underestimate how long it's going to take us. And so we need to be more diligent when it comes to time.
That's very true. And by the way, in our family, we have something which we took from an Everybody Loves Raymond episode, which was famous, known as AIS, which was ass in seat. And everybody knew the AIS time. So if we everybody needed to leave the house at 7 p.m. to make it to an 8 p.m. Dinner in New York City. It was AIS 6:59. And by the way, otherwise we're leaving without you. Go watch the Everyone Loves Raymond episode. Maybe we'll put a link in the show notes so that people could see what happened when he did leave without his wife in the car. But anyway, I digress. Let's hear this, because I know this is funny, because we got to know each other a little bit and are learning to getting to know one another a little more. I love to have the guests on Thrive Loud share the answer to this lovely question, which is, when you have trouble thriving, who or what do you turn to get back on the thriving track?
Yeah, there's two sources that come to mind, Lou. One is my mastermind group. So I'm very fortunate to be part of two phenomenal mastermind groups with people that I deeply respect and admire. So when I'm having trouble, they're probably my first kind of SOS call would be to them. And then I have an accountability partner who every Monday I send her my goals, and every Friday I report into how I went. And I think she's probably primarily the person that I would share that with. She has an intimate understanding of my personal and professional life because of these weekly updates and because of our regular conversations. So if I'm struggling with something, she's probably the first person I would go to. She happens to be one of my mastermind members. So I think if people are struggling with something, having someone they feel safe that they can reach out to, who's not going to judge them, but sometimes we just need someone to listen to the crazy town that is our head traffic, in my case. That would be me. And often when we articulate the crazy and why we're getting stuck, someone else can unpack it very differently because they look at it without emotion. That's what I rely on these people to do for me.
I like it a lot. I want to just jump back a little bit because I'm really curious, because this is interesting. You mentioned it, but we didn't get back there. Do you feel, going way back to when you were a kid, not that you're that old, but more just way back in our own lifetime?
Oh, I'm ancient. I may sound like I'm 5, but I'm ancient.
Was there something in your childhood or something in your early years that showed that you were very accountable and productive and efficient? Because there's definitely something that must have happened. Was that something that you've always had since you were a little girl?
You know, I'm the oldest of 5. And so if you're the oldest of 5, we had like a Brady Bunch blended family. With that comes an enormous amount of responsibility. When I was a teenager, my mum got remarried and had 2 wonderful little people. And part of my responsibility was helping take care of them. And so what I learned was how to get things done very quickly, because there's only 14 months difference between my brother and my sister. And so I think having exposure to that, I was also the kid who could work out very quickly how to get something done and who I needed to help me. One thing I'm really good at is leveraging the brilliance of other people. I know exactly who to call for what, which speaks to your connections, right? The strategies that you share. And so I'm very good at getting things done, not necessarily through my own skill set, but through people I know can be brilliant at execution. And I can't point to a particular thing, but I think probably being the oldest of 5. And I had a mom who was like, my mom is like a social butterfly. My mom was constantly always helping other people in the church, in the community. And so what I noticed with her was the way that she related to people. And my people love being around my mom. And I think some of that must have been passed in the gene pool, because she is really brilliant at doing some phenomenal things with often limited resources. So I got exposed to that role modeling very young, and that had continued into my corporate life. In corporate, I realized the people who were getting ahead were the ones who could get things done. The people who were being promoted and getting pay rises and getting a higher profile was because they could get projects completed on time and under budget. So I learned project management. I volunteered constantly in my corporate career. And that's how I had such an accelerated corporate career, which obviously helped me in my entrepreneurial journey as well.
I like it. I like the whole bit. Give me and the listeners all the places that we can find Neen James, and tell us everywhere we can also find and learn more about Attention Pays.
Well, lucky for me, Lou, there's only one Neen James online. So that makes life very easy for the Thrive Loud listeners. So Neen is spelled Neen, and my last name is James, James. Now, if you want to connect with me on my website, that's an easy place where you can find hundreds of articles you can download for free. If you want to connect on Twitter, I love playing there. But if you want to peek behind the curtain of what life's really like for me, then Instagram is a fun place to play.
I like it. I like it. I like it all. Now, I want to ask this question because, I've had people from all over the globe, different accents, different places out there. Do the Australians sound funny, or do us Americans sound funny? That
is a loaded question. When I lived in Australia, I was always fascinated, Lou, because people would say, oh, he's from Boston, she's from Chicago, oh, that's a New York person. I was like, how on earth can they tell that? Now, living here, I totally understand it. And now I obviously hear the differences in Australian accents, but I always marveled at people who could tell those wonderful accents. Now I'm a little better at it. But I think it's interesting because you can pick an Aussie by the way that they are super lazy with their language. We shorten everything, right? We're so lazy with our language. We don't say sunglasses, we say sunnies. It's just hilarious. As soon as we meet you, we will shorten your name. We're so familiar, so laid back. So you can pretty much pick an Aussie very quickly.
I'll say this story to you and to the listeners. This goes back into the mid-'90s. I was on a consulting project at a large financial institution. And on the project, I was the only U.S. American on this weekly phone call that we had, which entailed one South African, one Brit from Great Britain, one person from Wales, one person from Scotland, two people from Ireland, one Kiwi, and two Australians. This was the Anglo call of the week, was what I affectionately called it. But I will tell you this, that as somebody who grew up in an area where accents could be very well known, living in New York or Brooklyn or Long Island, wherever I've been in my life, I will tell you the ability for me to hear where that Anglo person is from is actually pretty cool. It's one of those things that I've always been, oh, that guy's Afrikaans and this is that. I can't replicate the accent, but I certainly can tell you where it's from. And it's no different than, picking out somebody from Chicago or Boston. It's just familiarity.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because accents are an attention strategy, right? And when you think about it, there are certain accents that really get your attention. You had Phil Jones on the show and he read his poem, If, in one of your previous episodes. If people haven't listened to that, that's a really cool mini episode. But I think that some accents are very easy to listen to and some are very melodic. And so I think it's interesting as an attention strategy to really leverage an accent that you have. Or in my case, I sound like I'm 5. And so I make fun of that when I speak. But it's always memorable, right? It's a really quick way to get an audience's attention.
Well, I will say this. You've gotten this particular guest's attention, and I've heard you speak and seen what you deliver. So whether you sound like you're 5, you certainly don't act like it. You act at least like you're 6 or 7. I mean, at least.
Good. I'm glad. Well,
clear.
Hopefully I sound like a grown-up in my book. So,
Well, we will put all the plugs in every place where everyone can find Attention Pays and link to Neen James as well. And I love to kind of wrap our show up with our favorite question. I'm kind of curious where this one's going to go. Neen, what is your all-time favorite movie?
Easy. Devil Wears Prada. I know every line. I know every outfit. I read the book with girlfriends. I love Meryl Streep. Love the movie. I know that makes me like a girly girl, but I absolutely love Devil Wears Prada.
So can I get you excited?
Sure.
On that note? Well, for one, Lauren Weisberger, the author of Devil Wears Prada, is coming on the show in a few weeks.
Congrats! So that's awesome. I'll definitely keep an eye out for that.
And you know that that is now coming to Broadway. So there will be a Broadway release of The Devil Wears Prada, which was produced by Elton John.
We need a date because I am so going to see that.
Well, it is coming out, and we will have another episode with a gentleman by the name of Rob Fried, who has been behind the finances of a lot of the accounting firms that have helped produce a lot of the Broadway shows. And we're going to talk about all of that and how all these things come to life. But that's pretty cool. And it is, by the way, it's a really great book, because I take a personal note to it, because I know all the stories that happened as they were really happening when she used to work for some very famous, publisher at a certain magazine on 42nd Street. However, what they've done really well is taken a great story with really great actor, and come on, anything with Meryl Streep just rocks.
I know, it was brilliant. I'm so excited. I did not know that about Broadway. That's another reason to see it in a different format.
Absolutely. Neen James, absolutely a pleasure to have you on Thrive Loud, and thank you so much for being on time.
It's my privilege. Thank you for letting me serve your listeners. It's such a wonderful thing that you're doing in the world. I really appreciate you.
Oh, I appreciate you right back. And thank you so much. To all the Thrive Loud listeners out there, thank you for joining us. And until next time, keep thriving onward and upward. And remember, be brief, be bright, be gone.
You've been listening to Thrive Loud with your host, Lou Diamond. Make sure to subscribe on iTunes, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. And follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Thrive Loud. Or find us on the web at thriveloud.com.
We interrupt this broadcast to bring you an important announcement. Thrive Loud is officially the best podcast ever. And Lou Diamond is still bald. That is all.